Namaste and welcome to the Healing Mirror podcast. My name is Saraya Saraswati, and here I'm offering discussions, global satsangs, and interviews with spiritual teachers, philanthropists, and awakened and inspirational humans. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Healing Mirror podcast. I have a very special guest here with me today, and that is Australian-born artist Jandamara Cad, who grew up in the 70s, a descendant of the indigenous Yota Yota nation from northeastern Victoria and Dja Dja Wurrung nations from central Victoria. In the 70s, it was tough to grow up in Australia as a mixed race person. And Jandamara sadly endured terrible bullying, as well as physical and sexual abuse. At the young age of 13, Jandamara left his home and spent a very tough period on the streets in Brisbane. During this period, he was in and out of the juvenile justice system. And Jandamara will share a little bit later about this quite dark period of his life and how it shaped him. He admits developing his strong form of endurance during these tough early years. And this endurance kept him seeking for healing, for peace, and for fulfillment. He went on to spend time in Melbourne, later working in the family services before returning here to the Sunshine Coast. Jandamara has found an exceptional way to express his cultural ties to country and his Aboriginality, his strong emotions and the trauma and the pain that he's experienced in life. And he found a way to express this when he picked up a paintbrush at a very dark time in his life. And something magical happened for him then. He went on to study art and actually worked as an art therapist before focusing on his own works. He also likes to support other Indigenous artists as well. Jandamara is now a loving father of two delightful girls, Mindari and Nanyara. He's an accomplished artist and he lives peacefully with his family on 40 acres, I think it is, so a beautiful piece of land here on the Sunshine Coast. Jandamara's risen from an early life of terrible abuse and hardship to become a unique artist who combines the cultural differences as a form of expression. And he sees it as his dharma. And when he's painting, he feels free. I'm actually proud to have one of his pieces in my own home, although it's a print. But I love it so much, and it's the piece called Uncle. So I'd like to welcome Jandamara.
I love the way that the universe or that universal flow will just guide me on a journey, and I'll be watching sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 18 hours. I'll be watching my hand move, watching my body stand there, and I will forget. Time and space disappear. I am absolutely at one with that brush to the point where I'm the observer watching this process. And it is so not an automated switched off process. It is an absolute fully embodied rich experience that unfolds. And there are things in there that I cannot teach or I cannot explain to another that happen in this language that is so expansive. It is a spiritual practice for me. Well, when I say that, it reflects, you know, as most of all expressions of your life, you can transform. Even washing dishes, such a what can be a mundane thing can be a spiritual experience where it's alive and embodied with this freshness. I'm yet to master that one with dishes, but with painting, it definitely happens so abundantly. If it starts to become too heavy or it becomes a job, I think I will let it go. I won't continue it, but I don't think it ever will. It's very much intertwined with my dharma, my life's purpose at this point, because as much as the paint and the canvas and the wood comprise of an image, that journey is something that is part of my life's purpose and the subjects that are interwoven within that.
Mm, beautiful. And that, you know, when we have that joyful flow with something, it doesn't feel like we're working, does it?
Ah, absolutely. And in that, you know, it can be 18 hours and I will forget that I have to go to the toilet. I will forget that I have to eat. And then I'll go, you know, come out of it. And even then it's a weaning process because I'll still keep walking back into the studio and looking at this piece and engaging with it. Because when I'm looking at it, I'm not just looking at that image. There's, as I say, there's an expansiveness, and this expansiveness feeds my spirit, or it nurtures my spirit. It nurtures me in a way that, at the moment, my girls are nurturing me. So, stepping back from the canvas, you know, I'm moving that, shifting that energy into that. But when I was introduced to a paintbrush, as you mentioned in your intro of me at 16 years old, while serving time in a juvenile facility, I had touched a paintbrush before then. I had, you know, done things. I had painted as a child with my finger and all sorts of things, but I'd never really connected on a spiritual level. And I was locked away in isolation for breaking out of this institution because of the, you know, the abuse and, you know, the harshness of the place. It was a very harsh place. It was closed down 4 years later after I was released from there because of a Ford inquiry that found abuse. Anyway, so from there we were locked in isolation. And when I got out, this was 4 brick walls, no toilet, no bed, you know, left in there for a long period of time. It kind of, I wouldn't say it broke my spirit, but it awakened something within me. It awakened this surrender or letting go, because the first few days I was locked in there, or the first week, I smashed my head against the wall. I yelled and screamed. I did anything to not be there. But then over time, and there was a surrendering. And in that surrendering, you know, it was mixed emotions, because if I had had a rope, I think at that age, I would have taken my life, because I felt so isolated, so alone. No one could visit. You couldn't hear people's voices. But it was the perfect atmosphere for this awakening within. And I'd known this in my spirit as a child, but I'd never nurtured it. I'd never been shown how to nurture this part within that I recognize as my true self, the part that is ever present after my body falls away. This part was awakened, and that paintbrush was introduced at a pinnacle moment in time after this getting out of this isolation, and it was a perfect awakening of that aspect, of that expression of my life, and seeing that the painting was a physical expression, but it nurtured and facilitated my spiritual expression. And the anger that I had in my life previously to this, due to racism, due to, you know, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, due to the bullying at school, due to living in a society where you felt like you were a stain and that you were just worthless and empty, which I still carry parts of those aspects in my living life. But that awakening had opened something up in me that opened up a whole world where the real deep anger and the deep, because at that time at 16, 15, 13, and I felt like I just wanted to burn the world down, because I had I had no value or worth. I was just so angry, and it masked my deep sadness. And painting and that expression dissolved a lot of that, and it brought in a love. And when I say a love, this unconditional love or understanding that everything in your world, like I could say what I went through was really bad and it was terrible. And I could have made my life from that. I could have said, well, that happened to me and this is my life and I'm going to drink or I'm going to continue being incarcerated. And that's no judgment on anyone else. But for me, that stuff dissolved and the story of those things became, how could you say, irrelevant, if you like. Irrelevant in the way that the energy in them dissolved. And I started to make peace with my life. I started to develop ways to make peace. And painting was an external expression that allowed this internal process to flourish more and more. And in that, I saw that my purpose in life, my Dharma, is in servitude. And when I say in servitude, I'm in servitude of that message. I'm in servitude of that devotion to love. Because that love is that oneness that I see that in the dreaming for our mob, Aboriginal people, in all our origins, we have this understanding that of this oneness, and it connects us with everything, and it lets us understand that we are not separate. So the reason why I wouldn't want to hurt that person, the reason why I wouldn't want to steal from that person, the reason why I wouldn't want to damage those trees or dig up that land is because that's my spirit. That's who I am. And I am that. I am that, all that I see. So painting has been a blessing in many ways in opening up that consciousness. And it was a catalyst that, is now a massive part of my expression of life. And I see my life as laying down legacies, and in that it's a servitudal devotion to that love. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I understand that because, when I sing, there's absolute freedom there as well. And, my husband's actually a composer, and he disappears for hours into the studio and becomes the music that comes through him, and he just goes so deeply into that, and from that is born something beautiful. But I think we also realize that's through this vessel, and the gift of almost disappearing in that expression. The separate body-mind disappears, and in its place is that beautiful experience of non-duality, of one of us here, of one happening, of absolute presence of being. And in that presence of being, there is freedom. So yes, I really, really hear what you're saying. And for you, your gateway is through that beautiful expression of painting. And something I love and appreciate about your paintings is the colourfulness of them, and the way you've combined quite traditional portrait painting with the Aboriginal dot painting. Can you speak a little bit about that, please, Jandamara?
Sure. Yeah, so it's all an evolution. As I said, I can tend to get very bored if I'm traveling the same path continually. In that, I started out doing stories, traditional stories in paintings, and I started to find a limitation within that for myself to express and nourish and nurture that part of me deep inside. Then I started to move into portraiture, and I started with hyperrealism, which is a style that, it can look like a picture, but it takes someone but I would use a look or a means of a look to express volumes of information, a scene that would express a moment, as my friend Darren Chabelko would say, a moment in time. Um, and in this, I started to see the value of an image can create, like a piece of music. You could say it's the tempo, the beat, it's the rhythm, it's the words, but there's X factors. There's something so expansive in a piece of music that can trans all those elements, yet it encompasses all those elements. And I wish to, in my paintings, in my portraits, was that I could see an expansiveness to express. I mean, I love people. When I say I love people, I'm an introvert, but I love the interactions of people. I would often, when I lived in Melbourne or wherever I am, but in Melbourne especially loved it, the multiculturalism. I used to go to the markets, the Melbourne market, Victorian markets, and I'd go and sit there and I'd just watch for hours people's engagement and interaction. And I was so fascinated. I was so moved inside. So I wanted to capture these things in images that spoke about social conscience issues, about undoing, about bringing that love back into the picture. And so I started with hyperrealism. I did some that were fully in colors, which are portraits with oranges and blues, very vibrant, very rich. And I feel that, well, I say feel, exactly, color itself guides us back to feeling. Like, I've seen many studies done where they put people in rooms of yellow or pink, and they've subdued and they're calm. They put people in a room with red and it starts to agitate them and they get uncomfortable. Like, I've understood that, but in utilizing color, it's almost like, as you say, the spirit is guiding me where to place those colors and how to put them. And in such a way that them combined with the portrait, it involves people feeling. I feel that in this society, it's a highly intellectual society. So it lives up here and there's not a lot of feeling. We get told over time, or shown over time to shut those parts down. Shut, 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 shut. And the intellect is the epitome of our society. But we start to realize that we're shutting down our essential nature and our connection to one another when we do that. So, not to deviate too much, but I'd like to touch on empathy. Empathy is what I try to instill in my pieces. If you see these mass floods or cyclones or even the fires that we had recently, and you see people reaching out to their neighbors, to other people, when you see people going through that, they don't stand there while someone's being taken away in the water and go, well, are you a black person? Are you a woman? Are you Catholic? I don't know if I can help you. They will just jump in at that first cost to help someone, because this what's happening is they're switching from this mind and all these boxes and categories and labels, and they switch back into their feeling of their heart. And that empathy allows them to connect so strongly. So with my paintings, I endeavor to try and connect people with these images in a very poignant way, using color, hyperrealism, but also with the dot portraits. I am using a traditional indigenous style of painting where they would look out topographically upon the land and be able to sacredly read that land like a map. And when I say a map, not just an empty sterile, but a map of the human spirit, they would read that land and the contours and their identity as the connection to that. So poignantly, I've painted these indigenous style and these, markings over a portrait to show that for First Nations people, as the origins of us all, connection to land is inseparable. Like a water and fish, they look separate, but they cannot be separated. Once you separate our connection to land, you will see such things as disease and unwellness on multiple levels. For First Nations people here, they had no tooth decay, they had no hospitals, no sickness, they had no mental illness, they had no suicide. There was none of these things were known. And it's not because they were better than or impervious to these things. It was because they had at the core of their value system was this connection to land, connection to country, which then was their connection to community and family, and their their kinship laws, and all of these things. So the portraits I try to paint, as much as they aesthetically look appealing, which draws people in, I want them also to draw people back to their own self and see, let go of these things that say that those bloody yabos should get a job and be like the rest of us. What's wrong with them? You know, why have they got such issues, and why do they have the highest rates of suicide in the world? Why do they have the highest rates of incarceration and lowest life expectancy? And not to see these things at a surface level, but see that it's not them, it's we walking together. There's no us and them, there is only we. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And also I love to experiment and pioneer new ways of expression. So yeah.
That's beautiful. And it's great that you can say it's not, you know, us, it's we, after what you've been through. And I think, you know, there's a little sadness in my heart because my first three sons are half Indian Aboriginal. And so that's why I did a lot of travel in India when they were young, because their father died when they were very young. So I raised my boys on my own. And then later I had my fourth son, who was a little white boy, but, you know, they are brothers. You know, we are a family and there's no difference between any of us. That's how we were in our family. But I know now that my boys actually did suffer, as you did, quite a lot of bullying growing up as a mixed race, because they actually looked more Aboriginal than Indian, which was interesting. And my second son, Prem, actually died by suicide because he went through such an identification, you know, a personal identity crisis, and was such a beautifully sensitive young boy that the world at that time was quite cruel. And of course, mental health issues weren't as recognised as they are now. But also to see how, you know, my other two boys have risen up and have their pride. They're proud young men now, having children of their own, and they've claimed, you know, piece of their place in we, in us, as an all-inclusive culture, as humanity. And it's our humanity, and in the highest vibration of that humanity, our capacity for unconditional love, that is our greatest gift. One of your most famous paintings is of one of our most famous Australians, isn't it? Archie Roach, who's a multi-award winning singer and songwriter, and he was a great campaigner for Aboriginal rights as well. Did you actually meet Archie, or was this just something you felt and so you did his portrait?
No, I met Uncle Archie. I met yeah. I haven't seen him for a while, but he's a friend, and he's come around for meals at my house here, as he's had a music gig in the Pomona Silent Theatre a couple of times. I got in contact with his management, Jill, because Archie's not big on any social media or anything. It's all taken care of. He kind of walks the land in his own way. And in that, I met up with him and we got together, and for this portrait, which is the portrait, it's called Proud. And that was actually the first portrait I'd ever done, the dot style expression of identity as a portrait. Okay. And how I did that, well, first I did a hyperrealism one, which was beautiful, looked great, but it just didn't feel right in my spirit. So I scraped it back, did that portrait, scraped it back, and then started again. And then I did a full color one of Archie, Uncle Archie. And you know, full vibrant colors. And that looked great. The form of his face, everything came in, but it just didn't feel right. And so I scraped it back again. And then I did a black and white one, which, you know, had multiple things in the background. And then I scraped that back. And then I just was left nowhere. And I had like 2.5, maybe 3 months to work on this. Usually I like about 6 months to work on a portrait and let it organically unfold, and life things happen that engage with that, into, you know, that connect with that. And so in that, I was working, and I just started doing some dots on the bridge of his nose, and it all just fell together really naturally. It was like I'd done that many times before. But that pose of him where he's standing and looking off into the horizon, I said to Uncle when I caught up with him in Melbourne, I said, Unc, I'd love an image of you just to be natural, but maybe, you know, however you feel, because I don't like to orchestrate my subjects. I don't like to say, stand here. It's more of them, capturing them in a natural way. And I said, maybe, you know, think about what you've been through and think about how proud you feel of your people, your culture, your community. And I took around about 200 and something photos, but it was the first photo that I took that was used. It was that first photo. He, you know, like David Gopalul was a natural actor. Uncle Archie was a natural person. His spirit was so strong in himself, and he just stood with that. And it was called Proud.
Yeah, I
And this
love
piece
that
was about,
title actually. And you see that in it. It's a strong painting, isn't it?
very, very strong painting. And in that, you know, it was a finalist in the Archibald, you know, and in 2014, and toured around with their touring around to different galleries, which was amazing. When I went down for the, you know, the celebrations and the opening and the awards day and things like that, they would have had on opening night about 2,000 people there. And there's this big, bald Aboriginal man with the Aboriginal flag and dots behind him, you know, standing there in this space, this big painting. And you know, it brought tears to my eyes seeing it in there first, but it brought tears to my eyes again seeing it in there that night. And thinking how much things are changing. And as much as these things of the massacres, the murders, the rapings, the taking the children away, the displacement of land, and there's still non-acknowledgement or accepting the sovereignty of Aboriginal people's rights to, you know, this country and things like that. In that, you know, there is a healing, there is a collective awakening, and there is a slow healing that is happening. And as I shared before, a lot of First Nation people hold the highest rate of suicide in the world. If this doesn't stop or doesn't go to stop, we will become an endangered peoples, because we only make up 2% of the population. So to see Uncle Archie on those walls standing proud, there's volumes and volumes of information connected with that, and symbolism and representation that show that, because until 1967, Aboriginal people were classed as fauna. They were not recognised as human beings. So
I know,
legally,
and it's just horrendous to think that, isn't it? And I grew up in Western Queensland, so and I was born in 1960, and to 1968, I lived in Western Queensland. And out there, the racism was rife. And of course, there were big properties out there, and there were Indigenous people out there who were pushed off their land. There were some landholders that allowed the Aboriginals and were a bit more sort of heartfelt and open-minded for the day. But it was horrendous. And I remember hearing adults talking about Aboriginal people. And I remember as a little child being so, I couldn't understand. It just didn't click in my mind or in my heart. And I watched things change, but there was still that fundamental, particularly in the generation of my parents, who unfortunately grew up, that was the law at their time. So yeah, that still just astounds me that Aboriginal people were not recognised as human at that time.
That's right. And also, as they weren't classed as humans, the law wasn't protective of them. So you could go out and shoot as many Aboriginal people, and there was no law in the country that would take you to task for that. So, I think it was 91% of the population voted for the referendum and voted for Aboriginal people to have rights. Even then, there were seeds. And possibly, as you say, a lot of that talk or that anger and stuff towards Aboriginal, a lot of it was probably just learnt and passed on, and people didn't really feel that way. But they learnt in the culture to become that way because that's the way everyone else was. And you didn't want to go against that because it often meant that you were ostracized, especially back in the 60s and beforehand and early 70s and stuff. So it is so great to see that changing. And Uncle Archie's portrait on that wall, and him himself being a member of the stolen generation, never knowing until later life, meeting some of his family, as with Uncle Jack Charles and Uncle Bob Randall, these people that they've had such hard lives, living on the streets, incarceration, oppression, but they've come out, these people, through their music or through their words, through their actions. They speak of love. They speak of walking together. They reach their hand out continually through their own way and say, "Come,
legacy. What a
let's walk
legacy.
together." Absolutely. A legacy it is. And that's something that, has always really fascinated me, because the human spirit to triumph and overcome and switch from pure survival into living. And I feel that living, you could say, well, what's living and what's survival? Survival is just trying to get through your day. Living is where you're living and walking with spirit. You've got a higher purpose, and you recognize that, and you embody that, and you empower others to embody that in their lives, and empower others to have a better quality life. So yeah, beautiful thing.
Yeah, something that just passed through then, and it just suddenly seemed very, very, very true, Jandamara, is humanity seems to be going through a greater or an acceleration of awakening at the moment.
Yeah.
Actually, it's probably been over this period of 20 years, but it's even more so now, and it seems to be ramping up, so to speak, which is a funny way to speak about it. But I look at that, at prejudice, whether that's between religions or races, whether that's a colour prejudice or whatever that is a split and an inability. Because if we really believe that I am you and you are me, and there's one of us here, and that and that love and divinity expresses through body minds as multiplicity and duality, and the beautiful duality that we see with all the different body minds expressing. But when we experience or live as awakeness, there is only one of us here. When we are living identified as a separate body mind in duality, there is no absolute connection to the heart. And as that seems to be slowly being healed by more and more people, in that they are melting into that oneness of love, while still expressing through the body mind, but realizing that the sense of being that's always the same, from childhood through adolescence, through early adulthood, right to the point where we leave the body, that one thing that never changes. More and more of us are realizing and sitting in that. And when in that, prejudice, of course, cannot exist. So
Yes.
perhaps prejudice in all its different forms is just another expression of this split
Yes.
into that unawakened, separate state, and identifying ourselves as a body mind rather than the body mind is the vehicle and the glasses, like these glasses, you know, I put these on, I can see. I have a
Yes.
brain, I'm given a mind, just like I can have a car to drive. You know, that these
Yes.
are our vehicles, but the essence, the unchanging oneness that is beyond race, colour, creed, religion, etc., is where we
Yes.
all meet as one. And as these barriers are broken down, the prejudice is slowly reducing, not as fast as we'd like to see, of course,
Yeah.
but
Yes. You gotta laugh. Yes.
you know, and you know, and then sometimes we have to laugh and just see it as the playing out within
Yeah.
duality, the Leela, the play, you know, the divine play in the world of separation. But when we are not identified with that world, we can live in peace within that anyway, can't we?
We can, and as you say, it's that split, and that when I say this, I don't mean color of skin, because color of skin is irrelevant. You know, race is irrelevant. There is respect. There is beauty in culture. There is beauty in difference. You know, like the birds. You go into the forest, the kookaburra, the butcher bird, the lyrebird, all sing different. And if you had just one bird, it would be a beautiful song, but a symphony of music. That's what makes up the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So much more richly diverse. So with humans, that split. But when that mentality came to these shores 238 years ago and saw these people that were connecting infallibly with the land, their community, their values, it was like they saw them as a backward race of savages. Like, why aren't you building wheels? What? But they were so saturated in this oneness that they didn't have a concept of separateness. Their language structures, their belief system, their kinship laws, everything was centered around this oneness, this understanding that there is no other, that the dreaming that they're living is this continual connection. So everything was sacred. As you say, there was no treating of animals with disrespect, no treating the land, no treating yourself, no treating others with disrespect. In saying this, I'm not saying that there wasn't, there wasn't discord, or there wasn't, argument or things that
Well,
happened.
it was still a duality. You know, we are born, you know, as a body to live in the world of duality, aren't we? And within this world of duality, you know, if there's good, there's bad, if there's up, there's down. But within this, we can still find that peace of oneness and express
Yeah.
through the body mind. And I think, you know, a lot of us now, a lot of the people that I know are seeking to go back to that, aren't they?
Yes. Yes. That is the collective awakening that I too have noticed over the past years, growing in strength, and seeing these young people come through with this awareness and an inquisitiveness that is about self-introspection and seeing into their society, having a voice. I mean, I feel like our generations, and possibly every generation before, is been providing this platform for this younger generation to have such a voice, to be recognized and to be heard, rather than children are, in my generation, children were seen and not heard. But these days, they're like, you've got a lot to say, come and speak and share. Like
well, I
Greta
think some of that
Thunberg.
was our pain. You know, we were shut up, so we want our children to be heard, don't we?
Yeah.
We want what we didn't have, as children.
Yes.
And talking about childhood, Jan Damara, were you in touch with your Aboriginality or your culture as a young person, or was that something you had to reconnect with as an adult or a teenager?
It was very fragmented due to, you know, a lot of displacement. My grandparents, were all, you know, beaten or forced not to speak language, not to dance ceremony, not to share sacred stories. But a lot of our elders kept it inside, hidden, and kept it alive inside. But then there's a lot lost to the wind. So for me, I was always, my mother always, my mother's Aboriginal, my father's Scottish and Swedish. And my mother always kept me strong and proud and connected with my Aboriginality. But there wasn't a lot of the stories or the dances or those things from her. I mean, she was born back in the 50s. So again, when she was a little girl, she wasn't seen as a human being. And
So
she
was
was
she,
forced.
did she carry a lot of fear in her heart?
Oh, a lot of authority, fear of authority.
Yeah.
Fear, she would clean the house incessantly to ensure her children weren't taken from her. Because still until 1975, I mean, they're doing it today under different legislations, but until 1975, children were still being taken away under the Taking the Children Away Act. So I could have been taken away, born in 73. So still today, she cleans her house immaculately, which is part of that overcarry of, I've got to make sure that I'm seen as, you know, this person of total respect, you know, and that if anything, I've got to overcompensate for being Aboriginal because they will take my children away at the click of a finger or whatever. That had happened throughout our family, not in my mother's brother. My grandmother had to hide in ditches sometimes for, you know, a whole day or days hiding out, which she wasn't stolen away. But Uncle Jack Charles, which is my great grandmother's, my great grandmother was his mother's sister. So he was stolen away, as with many others, and taken, and just because they were Aboriginal, you know. And you think about it, why were these children lighter skinned, and the pretense of why they took them away? It was because many of these Aboriginal women were raped by white men, you know, that, as I say,
Absolutely.
that mentality. But yeah. So
look, it's just such a sad part of history. And
yes.
The interesting thing is that a lot of our beautiful Aboriginal people have lost their pride in their Aboriginality. And because when I grew up in Darwin, you know, lots of my friends were part Aboriginal, part Chinese, because there was a big Chinese community there as well. And, you know, part white from all sorts of parts of the world. But
Yes.
they were carrying a sense of shame. Whereas, you know, it's very interesting, isn't it, that the oppressors of the time, you would think it would be them that were carrying the shame.
Oh, you think so? Yes. I mean, how funny is it? You know, I saw footage a few months ago that just out of nowhere just surfaced, because I don't really, you know, I feel just like the Jewish people, you know, people say, why do you want to visit the past? Why do you need? Well, imagine the Jewish people, if they never got to talk about the Holocaust or never got to bring their stories out, the healing that wouldn't take place. So you've still got a big majority of people here, and it's changing, but slowly, but that still say, what the hell's bloody wrong with those Abros? You know, why don't they get over it, move on? You imagine saying something like that to the diggers if you went to the RSL. Get over it, move on. But there's a national, you know, what is it, a day of remembrance. You know, bless lest we forget. You know, and in that, I think, empathy is the key. I feel if people really knew the history, which is still hidden.
And in those days, so much was hidden. And I remember something very poignant, which just fits in with something you said, Jan Damara. I was a widowed mum at the time, and I took my 3 boys. We were in Sydney, and I thought we'll go to the gallery and we'll have a look at the art. And So we
Yes.
walked, and I thought, oh, let's go to the Aboriginal section. So we went into the Aboriginal section in a Sydney gallery, and this would be going back over 20 years. And there was a
Yes.
massive, big, huge photograph with a line of Aboriginal men with shackles around their ankles and hands.
Ah,
And I just
yeah.
stood there, and I'd never seen anything like that before. And I just absolutely lost it and started just crying, and gathered up the
Yeah.
boys that were, you know, leaping off the furniture, gathered up the boys and just took them out. I couldn't bear them to see that either. And obviously I had to heal that within myself. But
Yes.
it was such a shock to see this massive, I think it was a photograph, and to think
Yeah.
that humanity could do such a thing was
Such a
just
thing. I mean,
beyond my imagining. Yeah.
I've seen them with chains around their necks and things like that. And, you know, without going into it, because I'll also like to, yeah, share about how beautiful this blossoming is happening at this time. But for, you know, and I grew knowing of and hearing, and these are true stories of Aboriginal children being buried up to their necks and having their heads kicked off, you know, by soldiers as a game. How can you, again, it's that split, but you know, how you get to that point where you can do something to a, let alone an adult, but to a child. So, but today,
To any human, but as you say, I mean, there's amazing things happening now, so much with the reconciliation. And after my son died of suicide, I got quite involved in suicide, helping with education
yes,
around suicide and awareness of suicide and mental health issues, which when my son died, which was, you know, over 12 years ago, there just
yes,
wasn't that awareness. There was that terrible criticism in those days. It
yes,
was all, people were afraid if that one of their loved ones had died by suicide to admit they'd died by suicide because there was so much shame attached to it. So
yes. It was the easy way out if you did it and all of that stuff. Yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes,
So now I know that a lot of that shame through all the wonderful work that's being done is starting to be lifted, and even the
yes,
government now is recognizing that we have a massive suicide issue in Australia, but particularly with our Indigenous Australians, which is a disaster, and they're now, just now, really starting to address that and actually speak to the Indigenous elders and ask them, what can we do? You know, which is, it's about time, and it seems so obvious to you and I, but it's
so
happening.
much so. That change of telling to asking is worlds apart, because for so long they've been treated as children, you know, patronized, paternalized, and talked to as if this system that, see, for First Nation people, a lot of my elders still say, what is this notion of progress? Is progress digging deeper holes? Is progress having more things? Is progress really about money? You know, I've heard that saying, some people are so poor, all they have is money. Because
I
for
love
First
that.
Nation, they see that their true value is in their connection to country. And when they see that people, no matter what color, what race, what you know, background, want to connect with country, it's like, let's walk together. No one owns the dirt, the stars, the water, the ocean. No one owns these things. But what Aboriginal people have is the sovereign understanding and rights of custodianship that have lived on, walked and held
Yeah,
ceremony here for over 2,000 generations. So it's like,
yeah,
that's such a richness that we can all benefit from and learn and go, wow, when that flower there is flowering, that means that the mud crabs are down there, and you can just go and collect them. And they've had their babies. So you're not collecting the mothers and disrupting the
Yeah.
million-year cycles that they do of birth and, you know, and all of that.
So
If
beautiful.
you
I
go,
just love that weaving, that beautiful,
amazing.
honorable weaving of intelligence that's
Yes,
connecting in with the turning of the seasons and the coming and going of the
yes.
different creatures. It's beautiful. I love it. Yeah.
Rites
And
of
something else I
passage.
thought that was very powerful that happened just recently is when I finished writing my memoir about losing my brother and then my son to suicide,
Yes.
I decided to take the book before I released it out and walk it round. I got my first copy, like paper copy, and I took it out and walked it around Uluru and then through Katajuta, and then went out and spoke to some Indigenous women who lived there outside Uluru, and spoke to them about losing their sons by suicide. And that was just so powerful. But at that time, there were still people ignoring our Indigenous elders, saying, please don't climb the rock. And I was so
Yes.
pleased to hear now that no one's climbing the rock anymore.
Yes.
So it seems
Yeah.
symbolic that, you know, Australia's heart chakra, and maybe the heart chakra of the world, or it is now
Yes.
free, is now not having people disrespecting that heart.
Yes. And seeing that it wasn't those people that held it, but we all hold it sacred and see that there is value in that, you know. And
Yes.
so many things can open up from that. Even we have lost in Western cultural society, well, especially what I know of in Australia and certain other parts of the world, ceremony, our ceremonies. We've lost our rites of passage, things that really establish and solidify and connect ourselves with a deeper celebration of our connections with our spirit manifest in, you know, our community, the land, or,
Yeah.
you know, in our family. So
Yeah.
yes. And you know, women's business, men's business, coming
Yeah.
together business.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel they're all healthy biomarkers of a sustainable society. As I say, there's no right or wrong. Like, there's no, you know, this system works and this is the best, but we can take
Yeah.
aspects of all these different
Yeah.
things and meld them together. And yes, sustainability emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. We can make things happen. Understanding when to go fishing, and then having, you know, industry go fishing at those times, it doesn't deplete millions of years ahead. It
Yeah.
actually helps the cycle, and the next year it's like pruning. The next year you'll have an abundance there again and again and again. So it's like they can walk and live and
Yeah.
exist hand in hand. They don't have to be in conflict.
But if we could learn so much by studying the Indigenous cultures, whether that be Aboriginality or all the different Indigenous cultures who
Yes.
lived by the wisdom of the land, it's a very beautiful thing, and creates community that way, sustainable community.
And when we have community, you know, things, we feel connected. I went to India around about 20 years ago, and what I saw there was a physical starvation, people dying in the street of poverty and starvation. But what I noticed there is that their emotional connection and their wealth was so rich. When I came back here, upon being there for 3 months, traveling from the north to the south, I came back here and I was dropped off at a supermarket to get some supplies, and nobody would look me in the eye. Whereas in India, everybody's in each other's space, and
Yep.
it's an intimacy that they're very comfortable with. And you're uncomfortable at first, but then you start to flow with that. And when I came back, and I felt that this was far more dangerous here, there's an emotional starvation and not a connection. People are craving a connection with their
Mm.
community, are craving this mistrust and distrust and this competition. And it's really eroding at the fabric of our well-being, individually and collectively. So
I'm
yes,
hoping that we can come out of this period realizing
yes.
how important touch and connection really
Oh,
is, and that, you know, this fear of another human coming near us is just that, it's fear, and it will take us away from love.
yes.
Mm.
Yes, and as you say, it's part of that split in here where we see others as a competition as opposed to
Or a
it's
danger.
we and our, not us and them. Yeah,
Yeah.
as a danger, which understandable because it happens. But you know, yeah, it's not a simple. This is what needs. But I feel in some ways it is simple, and people need to come back to that love within, and we need to cultivate that in our lives because rather than going, we need to do this, 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 and this. If we come back to love, it will guide us to all of that naturally.
We can dream about this desire that I think we share, that there is an awakened greater community, but it has to start
Yes,
here. And what I'm hearing is that you get this through your painting and through your connection with your children, your connection to land and country, and those are your reminders, aren't they?
yes, absolutely. Those things are. Um, I mean, and they tend to ripple, so they allow it to go into all areas of your life, but they are big parts that open up. And when I say nurture, they nurture. It's like you nurture a tiny little seed and you nurture it and you protect it and make sure it's safe and it grows. And then it becomes a forest and the forest looks after you. And you go, wow, I am so encased by the forest. I'm no longer separate from that little tree. I am this whole
Yeah,
forest and I
yeah,
am being looked after. And without a doubt, when my last breaths come and they happen, I know that that forest is there and I am that forest and it will never go
yeah,
and it will never disappear. It's
yeah.
ever present. So
And
it is a,
that's the magic. That's just beautiful. I love that analogy of the seed and the forest. It's wonderful, because the body will grow old. It is growing old, and it will grow older, and then
yeah,
it will die, but the essence will never die. We are in essence the unborn. We are in essence the
yeah,
undying. We are the eternal forest, aren't we?
that's right. And it's funny to see. When I say funny, I don't laugh at anyone because judgment is another illusion that you find. But I see that our society is continually trying to stay young and not accepting these beautiful parts of life. I love my grey hair. I love
Yeah,
my
I got
line. I
plenty of
love
grays.
my, yeah, I love, and I think it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful, as is all the stages. I love that we are so unique. We are each singing our symphony in our own beautiful, unique way. I love that we are unfolding and, you know, diversely moving. I notice that I have to keep moving at times because my hips get a bit stiffer than they used to. But, you know, I don't wish that away. I accept it as a part of my life and it
Mhm.
reflects all that heavy stuff that I did in my younger days. And yeah, so it's a beautiful journey that continually unfolding. And you know, it's so, I remember years ago when I would, so I've been this, when I say been this way, I've been aware of such things for myself. And when I first was aware, there was years of transition where I spoke to my family or other people, and they kind of thought I was a little bit losing the plot. You know, I quit my job in Melbourne and said, I'm going to paint full time. That's it. And I don't care what the sacrifice is. And I'm going to follow love, you know, love in my heart. And I'm going to ripple that in the world around me. And, you know, I've seen over time people continually waking up more and more. And, you know, there's much more people you can share that with.
And
Even,
even though,
yeah,
you know, you've had tragic periods in your life, and I know I have too, but I feel like they pushed me um, to to burst the bubble, you know, and burst the bubble of illusion and really sit in presence and seek that awakeness, which now, you know, I'm lucky to experience most of the time. And could you, I'm sure you're on a similar page to that, Jandamara.
Yes, you know, I think we all have choices, and we continually face choices in the present moment where we could choose to be, without judgment of that word, but choose to be a victim or choose to be in love. And in that, you realize that those choices, as much as they may continually come up, they become easier and easier, because to remain in that place, there's really nowhere else. Well, for me, there's really nowhere else to be.
No.
Because it kind of, I think, you know, when I was younger, I laugh at my life, because when I was young, I remembered I wanted all these things. And I have things, I have nice things, and I don't mind them. But I saw that as giving my value and my worth. And if I had those things, and I had all those things. I had all these things, and they never made me any happier. Well, I think what I was always seeking was peace, just peace, just a peace inside myself, a peace to be able to sit in a space and feel comfortable in my skin, in my shadow, in my light, in the pendulum swing of uncomfortability and in the comfortability. So it's yeah.
Beautiful.
Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question, or what was your question again? Sorry.
I have no idea, but whatever you said was perfect.
Oh, there
I don't have scripted questions in my interviews.
Great.
We're just following the flow here, and the flow's been beautiful. So I'm really, really appreciative of your time. I know your girls are probably wanting to have you back to themselves again now. And I look forward to your next exhibition, actually, because when we do celebrate Reconciliation Week, I think you will be part of that with some of your art. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll have a few pieces, but it'll be a full exhibition at the Koroy Butter Factory at some point, and there will be a lot of First Nation artists. As I said, these days I kind of see my part as supporting other people. So fantastic. I use my art to draw people in, to get these other artists seen, heard, and recognized for the beauty that they're creating and rippling into the world, and walking in a way that is about us, we and us together. So very valuable. Beautiful. And you see some of these young people that are heading off the rails, when they are seen for the value that they are, you see the smiles, and that to me is beyond any amount. I mean, billion, trillion, quadrillion dollars, whatever you could put, there's no value. It's just, it's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jandamara, thank you so much for being a part of the Healing Mirror podcast. I look forward to catching up as a friend in the future as well, when we can travel again past 50 kilometers, which is the craziness that we're experiencing right now. But namaste.
Yes. Namaste.
I see you.
I see you. And it's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Join me for upcoming podcasts. And please, if you found this helpful, or you'd like to share a comment, or perhaps your own experience, I'd love for you to leave that message down below this podcast. I enjoy reading your feedback, and I'm sure we can all help each other to hold hands, to remain awake, present, clear, and loving. Namaste.